कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Indian literature and aesthetics is replete with examples of the Navarasa. But there is one rasa that we see abundantly in literature, and it hasn't been given a name until now. This is the 10th rasa, and we are going to talk about it with our guest today, Sumanyu Satpathy. Sumanyu, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jasleen.
And now this 10th rasa, the nonsense rasa, how do you define it?
I always refer to the way T.S. Eliot had talked about nonsense. He says it's nonsense is not a vacuity of sense, but a parody of sense. So, and both in literature, in philosophy, everywhere, and in modern poetry especially, nonsense has been used to an extent that we haven't imagined. So, most of the time, whenever we talk about nonsense, people are dismissive about it. You know, nonsense as a literary genre. So that was the idea behind putting together an anthology. Whenever we asked people, okay, is there any nonsense literature that you have written or you know of in various Indian languages, everybody said, no, there is no nonsense, as if, you know, writing or talking about nonsense was something infra dig. So it was a revelation not only to the editors, but also to the many translators and readers when the book came out, that this is such a widespread cultural phenomenon, right from our traditional oral literature to 20th century modern poetry.
And this goes right back to the Vedic times.
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially in the Bhakti tradition, whether it is, you know, Bedagu, you know, in Kannada, or Kabir's Dohas, and
or even Namdev.
Or Namdev, yes. So many of those have been translated, though maybe people would, or they initially felt scandalized when we called these very serious verses nonsense. But the idea behind calling them nonsense is to not so much bring them down as to actually understand what we mean by nonsense.
Now, why is it that you know, there was this need to invent or create the 10th rasa, the nonsense rasa, and not amalgamate it with hasya ras?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, late 19th century, early 20th century, very serious-minded poets and literateurs in India, when they came across literature of this kind, you know, why say Edward Lear or Lewis Carroll, they said, okay, we have humor and we have what we call chele bhulano choda, as Tagore calls them. But we have never, in modern times, we have never attempted this genre. So Tagore went into writing late in the 19th century, early 20th century, late 19th century actually, a whole essay on chele bhulano choda. And I have a copy of the book which is simply called Choda, which he wrote. But it took many more years for him to actually sit down and write nonsense, and that was 1937.
In fact, he said, and I quote from your book, where he says that you urge me to write simply, but...
Exactly, yeah. Sohaj kotha likhte amai kohoje, sohaj kotha likha jay na sohoje, etc., etc. This is an apology he offers to Rajasekhar Basu, who advised him. He used a pseudonym, Parshuram, you know, Rajasekhar Basu, and he asked, he was a humorous satirical writer, and he asked Tagore, okay, you have been writing such serious stuff, highly philosophical, romantic, but where is nonsense? Which was then called Abol Tabol. It was not Tagore who wrote nonsense, it was Sukumare who wrote nonsense, and wonderful nonsense.
And he called it the rasa of whimsy.
Rasa of whimsy, or the 10th rasa. He doesn't call it the 10th rasa, we call it the 10th rasa, but he says this is one of the rasas which should have been included. We talk about Hasya rasa, but this is special. This is not, as you said, this is the question you asked, why is it not part of Hasya rasa? It is a part of Hasya rasa, but its status is quite distinct from other kinds of expressions of Hasya or humor, because in Hasya there is still sense and reason, but in nonsense apparently there is no sense, you know.
But in fact that in itself is paradoxical, because where you quote Kabir, for example, where he puns on khaya, khoya, narangi,
gadi and
gadi,
that,
and he uses the pun that is intended there for very deeply philosophical explanations.
Yes.
Now, why then would you call it nonsense?
See, these are, we don't call this nonsense in the strict sense of the term.
Right.
We are trying to say that they share the same technique that nonsense has, you know, playing with words, exploring different meanings. And if you see one of the verses by Anushka, you know, where she says, you know, a character says, I think, and in another stanza, the character says, I am, and so on. Then finally, in the final stanza, she says, I proved Descartes wrong. So there is a lot of philosophy there, but it's done in such a way that it's a parody of a philosophic argument rather than nonsense.
So this is really a device to help a person think out of the box, perhaps, or come to conclusions which are not the normal conclusions. Now, normally when one would think of nonsense or verse which is nonsense, then one thinks of these tongue twisting words like takbak, which you have quoted.
Yes, there are many.
So those are words that really don't have any meaning. Or Lewis Carroll's Tweedledum and Tweedledee, it has no meaning really, not in any language. And in fact, Alice does say that this can't be translated into French because this is not English.
This is not English, yes. It's very true. See, this is one kind of nonsense which I personally do not value much. That is, you know, repetition of sounds, you know, meaningless sounds. And a lot of Odia nonsense and many other kinds of children verse, they are there to amuse the toddlers, you know, small children, because of the sound that they produce. But they don't entertain an adult reader. Good matured nonsense actually appeals to both the toddler, the child, and the adult.
So how exactly would you define true good quality nonsense?
How would I define
Because
it?
we know that it follows a tight poetic structure. It is not something that happens in an ad hoc manner. There is a grammatical and poetic structure to it.
It promises, these lines promise to take us somewhere, you know, in a reasonable sort of way. There are words that we can connect to the empirical world around us. But then suddenly they disappoint us, you know, they lose that connect between the signifier and the signified. You know, there is a promise to carry the sense forward, but then suddenly there is a disappointment. It's something very close to what humor does. There is an expectation of a certain kind, but that expectation is thwarted in a very intelligent sort of way. It's not done in a dumb sort of way. It's not because of the foolishness of the speaker, but the speaker is outsmarting the reader or the listener. So that is where the element of fun or humor comes in.
When you came down to working on this book, The 10th Rasa, there are three of you who have edited this anthology. Michael Heyman, who's also a musician besides, and Anushka Ravi Shankar. So how did this coming together happen?
That's a very interesting story. I was working in Shillong. I'm talking about my part of the story. And when I transferred myself from Shillong, Nehu to Delhi, the students gave me a farewell, and they gave me a couple of books, one of which was Lear's Complete Nonsense, as if to tell me, you taught us only this, nothing else, you know, whatever you said or did here was complete nonsense. Anyway, and of course, because of my own interest in T.S. Eliot was a big fan of Edward Lear. And he has parodied, you know, how nice to know Mr. Eliot, etc. This is something something that Edward Lear had said about himself. So with that kind of background, when I came to Delhi, I discovered a book which is a very rare book in the rare book section of Delhi University Library. It's called Indian Journal by Edward Lear. I discovered, I was one of the very few who actually then knew that Edward Lear had visited India in 1873-74, 2 years nearly, and he maintained a diary with sketches of the Taj Mahal and Banaras Ghat and all that. It's wonderful. So I got this idea about how he talks about Nana Sahib and all that. It was soon after the Sepoy Mutiny, and that had caught his imagination. Then I saw that his nonsense was not really nonsense. It did refer to, like these Indians in his limericks would die. A person from Madras, it could be another person from somewhere else in India. In the 5th line, this person dies, and the sketches are racist. So I thought that even Lear's nonsense can be subjected to discourse analysis. And I wrote a paper about his reception. He was surprised to know that people children in Roorkee, for example, knew his Owl and the Pussycat even before he came to India. So that shows that he was already well received in India. And because parodic and satirical sketches and cartooning had already started in Bengal, so the young readers of Lear started emulating him, and Sukumar Rai was one of them. Then I saw that there is a proliferation of that reception. It steps beyond Bengal to Odisha and so on and so forth. So my paper was about that, and Mike and I were on the same panel at a conference in Calgary, Canada. He had just completed his work on Edward Lear. So we got together, and soon after I came back to India in 2000-2001, he wrote to me proposing that we do a book like this. So I became a kind of native informant, and I started making some preliminary explorations, and I gave some feedback to Mike. He then realized that yes, there is a substantial body on which we can work. Then he came over to India, not once but 3 or 4 times. We traveled together. At a later stage, he discovered Anushka.
So this process of collecting nonsense, whether it is in folk tale, in the oral tradition or in the written tradition, how difficult was it for you?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult, and I didn't agree with Sukanta Chaudhary, who had translated Abul Tabul, and in his introduction he says, okay, it's very difficult, I realize, but what would happen if I translate nonsense? It will be more, and it's not an accurate translation, it will become more of nonsense.
Yeah.
But I didn't take it that lightly. It was very serious. You have to maintain the rhyme and the rhythm. I'll read out a few lines from Odia and in English, and you will see how the rhythm, the original rhythm, has been captured in the English translation.
In fact, this one sees throughout the book that the translations have their own rhythm. The cadence has been maintained.
Absolutely.
And especially certain rhymes, which say for example Harindranath Chattopadhyay, for example,
Nani ki nao
chali, and it is so beautifully done that you don't really realize that it is a translation.
Exactly,
it appears to be an original piece.
I think the final polishing was done by Mike himself, who is a musician, and his mother, who has a wonderful sense of rhythm. So they didn't upset the nonsensical sense contained in the original, which were translated. So we translated them almost literally, except when so I'll give you an example. The one about tiger, in Odia, bagha phaga, we say. In Bangla, it's a bagha tago, etc. So taga, it's a nonsense word. There is no animal like that. So how do you do it in English? So tiger becomes figer.
Yeah.
So we repeat. It's a homonym. So that's how. This is one of the examples of how we do it. And there are other nonsense words in Odia and in Bangla which cannot be accurately translated, but you can sense it, like Sampurna has done, all that, Sukumar Rai. all those lines by Sukumar Rai about Kalpadrum. It's a team effort, the original translators and the editors together.
So was there a process where there was an initial kind of a transliteration or a direct translation, and then
Yes.
kind of cleansing it
Absolutely,
further and honing it to
absolutely, yeah. See, I could sit there and said, Sumanyu, read out the original. I just want the way you would read it in Odia. So let me hear the rhythm. So I would read it out, and then he would catch it, and he would try to transfer that to the translation, which I have already done. Okay, I have also tried to do that, but there are things he could do better than me. So that's how these translations are so strong. I feel they are wonderful.
They are indeed,
Yeah.
they are indeed.
But there is one where I have a little regret, you know, Ibn Battuta pehan ke juta nikal pade tufan mein. That one I wish I had maintained Ibn Battuta. When I
Which
asked,
you haven't, and in
I
fact
haven't,
that
yeah.
was one of my questions.
Yeah, see, when I told Mike, he hadn't heard of Ibn Battuta. He was a historical figure.
Right.
So I thought if he didn't know, many other readers wouldn't know. So it would truly be a nonsense. If I have done another collection where I have restored Ibn Battuta.
Oh, you have. And in this, you have, what is the word you used for Ibn Battuta?
Mr. Footloose.
Yes, Mr. Footloose.
Because I needed to use shoes, you know, because in Hindi,
Ibn Battuta rhymes
pehan ke
with,
juta.
yeah, it rhymes with shoes.
So I couldn't use juta.
Juta,
Maybe I
yeah.
could have,
Maybe
because
you
many Indians understand juta. I could have done that, but in order to make it rhyme with shoes, I had to say something like Mr. Footloose, who is a traveller, because Ibn Battuta was a traveller.
You were mentioning this very interesting incident, this experience you had when you were trying to interview people like Behra, for example.
Oh yes, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Actually, that one of the greatest joys was the discovery of these poets. Some of them are totally obscure, like Niranjan Behra. Some others are very serious modern poets, like Kunyuni. You know, he is known as a modernist. So that tie that exists in European modernism is discoverable in India also. That someone like Kunyuni and other modernist poets have
Yes,
done
a lot
it.
of them
Yeah, yeah.
are serious poets.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
J.P. Das, for example.
J.P. Das,
Yeah.
you know, all these modern Oriya poets, Kannada poets and so on, they've all attempted. J.P. has at least 3 volumes, collections of nonsense. 2 have already been published in Oriya, and the 3rd one is due very soon. I have translated one of his collection for NBT, and it's called Nana Sense. You know, I have joined 2 words, you know, Nanabaya, that is the traditional name for children's birds like Chele Bula No Choda, and nonsense. So I call it Nana Sense. Nana also means vivid, that is, you know, variety of etc. So that collection is now due. It may be out in a couple of weeks from now. But we are talking about Niranjan Behra. You know, that's another discovery. He had written a letter long back to JP, and JP showed that letter to me, and the place name was, you know, it was beyond me. It's called Nachipuria. Try finding it on the Google. Google Map doesn't record it. It's got forsaken place, totally obscure, and it's somewhere in Balasore district of Odisha. So I asked around, and finally I made it this place. And he runs. It was a discovery for many reasons. He wasn't home. He had gone to take a bath in a pond, and you know, he came back very old, retired schoolmaster. Nobody knew of him. He has put together a whole collection of children's books, you know, magazines, obscure and you know, very rare books. And he's made a collection. He calls it a library, and it's an Athenaeum. You know, a person who is located in such a remote, place, it's amazing how knowledgeable he is. He knew of Bangla nonsense, English nonsense, and he knew all the forms like Clariou and Limerick. And he asked, he said, I went and asked some English professors in the cities, and they said they had no clue what these meant.
Oh, so what was his access to this knowledge?
It was the proximity to Bengal, I believe. You know, so he had read up a lot of Bengali children's literature, in which he found some nonsense, maybe Sukumar Rai, and then that led him to Edward Lear. So he has a wonderful sense of rhythm. Even now JP says he's the best in Odia.
When you talk about the sense of rhythm in the 10th rasa, the nonsense rasa, there is this quotation about how it is likened to the dance of Shiva, because there is a constant creation and a constant annihilation of words, and a cycle is formed.
Yes, that's Tagore's verse actually. I'll read it out. He thinks it in terms of the creation, Bidhi, he says. He says, why has Bidhi 4 faces? And he says that the one face is about the articulation of philosophy. Ektate darshan kore bani borshon. The other one is about the utterance of the Veda. Ekta dhonito hoy Veda uchcharane. Then the third one, ektate kavita, rose hoy dravita. So these are the 3 faces. And then finally he says, ektate ho ho rabe, paglami beda bhenge uthe ichhashiya, tai tari dhakkai baje kotha pakhai, baje kotha. That's nonsense. There's so many words that Tagore uses, jata lekha, baje kotha, etc., for nonsense, But then he transforms this as the preoccupation of the Lord. It's one of the preoccupations of the Lord. So don't be dismissive about nonsense. I'll read out the same lines in my English translation. I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, no one had translated this before I did. In the 4th, waves of excitement break the dam of sanity. From such an impact, perhaps nonsense swirls up. Thus, the disciple of Brahma, the poet says, no matter how much you laugh at me, it will be on record. That imagination plays with creativity, but it is no less crazy about miscreation.
Oh, that's beautiful, absolutely beautiful, Sumanyu. And we have it on record that this indeed is a valid rasa, the nonsense rasa.
Yes.
We wish you all the best, and we hope that we see more such anthologies in the future.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being on our program today.
My pleasure.
This is a book which is written as a personal historical travel narrative about the Indian hospice in the old city of Jerusalem. This is a very old institution which goes back to the time of Baba Sheikh Farid, who actually traveled to Jerusalem and is said to have meditated in the place where the hospice later collected and grew. And this place is still run by an part Indian, part Palestinian family, but as Indian nationals, and by Sheikh Munir Ansari for the last 100 years, his father and now himself. So this is a short excerpt from my first visit to the Indian hospice in Jerusalem. To find Herod's Gate, I have to go to the other side of the old city, to its northern wall. Beyond this wall lies the crowded commercial center of Arab East Jerusalem, pierced by Saladin Street with its shops, internet cafes and small hotels. The crowded pavements where fresh kebabs are roasted next to mounds of shoes and underwear give the whole place the bustling look of an authentic Arab market, very unlike the quiet, orderly streets of Jewish West Jerusalem. On this side lie the buildings of the American colony and the houses of the Jerusalem notables that came up in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It is difficult on any day and impossible on a Friday for a car to navigate the road that separates the old city from this neighborhood, or to find a break in the constant stream of pedestrians, women in hijab and men in keffiyeh, many walking with canes, heading to the old city to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Haram, the third most holy of Muslim religious sites. I look for flower sellers as I enter Herod's Gate. It has also been known as Bab al-Zahira, or the Gate of Flowers, down the centuries. Instead, there are fruit sellers lining its substantial archway. It is the beginning of March. The last pomegranates, the early oranges, watermelons and melons are piled up inside the gate. As I enter the archway, I am greeted by a man of medium height, with alert grey eyes and a polite, easy and genuine smile. I am Nazir, he says, Nazir Ansari. Quickly he leads me through the gate and up a few steps into the street inside the old city. Before I have had time to look around, I find myself staring awestruck at a green iron gate with its 2 stone pillars. The words Indian Hospice are carved on one of them and on the other, in Arabic, Zawiya al-Hindiya. An indescribable excitement grips me, an Indian presence in the middle of old Jerusalem. Nazir smiles gently and unobtrusively at my surprise and opens the gate. "You are in India now," he says as we start walking up the broad path from the gate. Tall saru trees with their tight pine cones line both sides of the path. "My father is waiting for you." I look up. At the end of that path of broad steps stands a tall, erect man, dressed elegantly in an overcoat, with a woolen scarf round his neck, a soft peaked woolen cap protecting his head. Finally, several months after I had first heard mention of the place, I am about to meet Sheikh Mohammed Munir Ansari, the director of the Indian Hospice. "You are welcome." Sheikh Munir takes my hand warmly in both his hands. When we get to know each other better, he will always embrace me, thrice, Arab style. We stand for a few minutes at the entrance to the hospice. I try to gauge his age. He looks younger than the 80 he turns out to be. He smiles easily, and the eyes behind the gold-rimmed glasses are lively. Behind us, a steady stream of Palestinian women and children are coming up the path and entering a complex of 2 buildings that seem part of the hospice. "Those buildings are the UNRWA clinic," Sheikh Munir says by way of explanation in his clear, deliberate manner, "for the refugees of 1948. This building was built by Indian soldiers during the Second World War. It is called the Delhi Wing, and this," he points to his left, "is where we live now, the Travancore Wing. It was also built by the soldiers." As if on cue, the gate to the Travancore Wing opens and a tall woman steps out. She is stylishly dressed in trousers and high heels, and her hair is pulled back in a French knot. Confidently, she extends a hand to greet me. Her eyes shine with the same elemental playfulness that I have seen on her father's face. "This is my eldest daughter, Najam," the Sheikh introduces us, "and this," he points to another smartly dressed lady who comes out of another door, "is my other daughter, Noorjahan. You can call me Jani. Everybody does," she introduces herself. "And this," Nazir adds, pointing to a third lady who has joined us, "is my Wafa, my dear wife." I don't know it then, but this is going to the pattern of so many meetings. Nazir outside, his father at the top of the steps, and then the ladies who happen to be at home.